Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So glad you are here. Now, as you can see, I have been following the Nancy Guthrie case, and a lot kind of came out yesterday. Not just in the readings, but there was a lot of development and movement in the case without a lot of confirmation about what's going on. But since we have reached this point in the case, I feel like it's a good point to go back to some basics in the timeline. Evidence isn't the only pressure in the room right now, okay? People are. So at this time, you can expect there's a lot of discussion going on. Um, I'm sure within the family, outside of the family, there have been some reports of maybe a private investigator being hired by the Guthrie family. And I feel like this kind of points to the fact that they are definitely at a stalemate, and there may be some trust level issues here as well, that maybe Savannah doesn't have a lot of hope and trust in the law enforcement that's involved with it currently. Um, Now, in this episode, I do want to examine some of the interrogation psychology, how pressure kind of builds, how fractures form, and how investigations shift from someone, well, basically how investigations shift when someone starts to feel the pressure or the weight, which is, I think, what they were trying to do with all of the sending out of the agents, sending them to one side, going to Rio, diverting some activity from the media by going to the hospital, going to between back and forth between Nancy and Annie's house. So I feel like they're creating, first of all, they're doing their job around the clock, but I think they're also creating some level of diversion, because this is when people start to squirm. You start to see who looks guilty. Remember, yesterday or the day before that, there was a lot that came out about someone looking guilty. I posted a video on the ransom bait that we just had, where they were asking for $6 million, but law enforcement sent over 300. I think, an effort to either see if the person would take the bait, if they were desperate, if this is the case of somebody who's sophisticated enough to be able to, like, really demand the $6 million and forego $300. Like, do they need that money? All of those things were factored in, I think, as far as why they sent the amount. Now, what they did not discuss is like the consequences of doing that. Not to say that we would have found Nancy or gotten more confirmation from her, but there is something about the fact that we didn't get an update from law enforcement after that. So let's get into what pressure does to people in general. Okay. So interrogations are not about yelling, even though I'm sure that's what we would like to do. I think that's also why we saw a shift from from Savannah being um, very emotional to a more composed, uh, talking person. So investigators could be looking at that too, because they know to look for micro shifts and micro expressions, not just the dramatic confessions, to kind of see what's going on. Um, right now, I think law enforcement is about creating fatigue, or the air of fatigue, maybe silence, and all about like precision. Okay. So some of the indicators that I'm sure we can start to look for is over explaining something about timeline inconsistencies, because that has been a lot of some of the cards that have come up. I do know that there was a mention at one point in the reading, there was a mention that I picked up that Annie could possibly have misspoke and offered some information about an alibi or her timeline that conflicted with actual records, like phone records or email or GPS records, something to that effect. There could be some emotional flattening that could also indicators and I or indicate a certain level of pressure. And I think that's like when somebody tries to be a little bit more calm, but then there's like a shift in that too, because the video that I posted, that thumbnail with Annie and her husband Tommaso coming. Well, I don't know where they were coming. I guess they were leaving their house or on their way to Nancy's, but they were in the car and they were wearing hoodies. Well, Annie had a hoodie on. She was ducked down. Tommaso had his sunglasses on at one point, but they were over his forehead for a little brief period, but they both put their head down. That's not the natural composure of people who are innocent. If this was happening to my mom, no matter the fact that my sister is a notable, high profile person, I think I would not be concerned about my identity per se. Now, there could be the possibility of, because it did come out, something about being in protective custody to some degree. I believe that to some extent. I feel like they have separated the family. I think Tommaso is one place, and I think Annie is with her sister Savannah in the Catalina Hills somewhere. And they have been there for law enforcement to monitor if there's any communication and probably any discrepancies in terms of their emotional reaction to stuff, emotional flattening. So, sudden memory clarity could also be a thing after a certain period of vagueness. Maybe again, somebody said something. I'm going to go back to the original reading because I feel like that has a lot of the strongest transmission in this case. But someone misspoke or said the wrong thing, or they outright lied and it got confirmed. Okay. Any rehearsed phrasing could also be a key indicator that they are closing in on a person who may be showing signs of guilt. Um, if you say the same phrase over and over again, but it doesn't feel as natural as just recalling some details, I feel like if you're talking about something natural and it's like a positive thing, chances are that you may express it differently each time. If there is like emotion attached to it, you may find better ways of saying it. Some details may become even more clear. You may elaborate more on certain situations. It doesn't mean that you're remembering more info. Okay, because we don't want to have like sudden memory clarity after you've been vague this whole time and now all of a sudden you're coming up with like specifics. So that's where I think you can kind of like figure out that part. But I think we're going to hear some info about this timeline and Annie trying to save face for a person, but we'll get into that a little bit more. More on what happened after dinner. After dinner, I say that kind of like in quotation marks. And then I want to hurry up and get to these questions. Now, pressure reveals what comfort usually conceals. Okay. Every subject under investigation hits one of three of these like psychological walls, I could guess you could call them. You know, they could start being really defensive, denying certain things. They may even minimize large details that the average person may say. There's also sometimes there's too many details to even track. So they don't know what's important, what they should conceal. You know, it's kind of like they get flustered in figuring out what lie they should kind of like capitalize on. Another thing is there could be some level of an emotional collapse when consequences become real. I think this is what kind of gave it away, as it relates to people jumping to the gun and saying that Annie had some involvement in it, because the confession, where the first one that we got, where Savannah was like crying and hysterical, and then Annie, it was time for Annie to speak. And I remember her saying, "Mommy," and she said it more than once. And it was almost as a way to, it felt like manipulation, like almost being manipulatively charming to the public and or her siblings, trying to like garner some type of support. That was just my first impression. And now when I reflect on how emotional, but then like kind of fucked up she looked, sorry for the expression, it just seemed like she looked like, oh my God, this has gone left. So that's what I mean about like kidnapping gone wrong. When that car comes out, I feel like that's more so in reference to Not so much that Nancy wasn't supposed to die during this kidnapping. It's more about like the kidnapping ploy. That motive is not really faring well with the average person, let alone law enforcement. So now we're here. And I'm sure part of the reason why they have them split up, I mean, this is again not confirmed, but I'm speculating. I think part of the reason why they did that is to see if there's going to be any more incoming conversation. That text message that was sent asking if they received Bitcoin from that guy who said he had a fake ransom, that did not feel um, that did not feel genuine. Another thing is they probably have taken the phones from everyone. Now, there has been discussion about no one in the family has been involved. I think that has been sent out to the public as an official statement from the police department and possibly the FBI to tip off the public and kind of give a hint to the culprits, because I know that there's more than one, that, oh, okay, you don't have to look here anymore. Okay, so not looking here in this direction with this particular person anymore could fare well. However, we have their phones. So if they were communicating with certain people, those people are going to either find more ways to communicate with them. And we just heard something about like the ransom changing now. TMZ got a new letter or a new communication, which again, I think Harvey is in some involvement in this, like in terms of puppet mastering the whole thing. He's like the MC, the unofficial underground MC of this whole situation, to make it look real. But I think with what was I saying about the well, I feel like I'm losing my train of thought because I need to get to these questions. But I do feel like the fact that we haven't heard anything from law enforcement, them going quiet after a detention last night, that guy being detained wrongfully or whatever, that silence often means one of two things. And we can't even say officially that that was something that he was wrongfully detained for, because maybe it was still necessary for them to do so. He could be associated or in close communication with someone who is closely tied to the case. So we need to hold off on our accusations there. However, I do feel like they're testing contradictions. They're waiting to see if there's going to be some communication. I think the bombshell is a few things. They're going to find physical evidence. There's going to be digital tracing that they can go back to. And then there's something about like the alibis that are a dead giveaway. Okay. So they're letting pressure kind of mature because it has to come to that part. Yes, they've kind of had a slow head start, but I think right now we're picking up a lot of momentum that's going to move the energy in the right way. So another thing that, let's just get into like what happens when, I guess we could speculate what may happen if the pressure matures. Like I mentioned, the media attention will most likely have an uptick to it. We have been seeing a lot of news media show up at the houses at different points, and it feels as though there may be some developments, but really all they're doing is tracking the movements of law enforcement. Okay, so we can't really read too much into it, but the media is leaking out certain things. They are behind, like the official media versus the sleuths on the internet with boots on the ground are, they're kind of like 12 hours. Sometimes it feels like behind in terms of officially reporting on the things that have been followed, but there could be also another way that this matures when the family statements continue. Remember, the card yesterday said something about the family statements. A lot of digital evidence, I told you, is going to end up being confirmed. So, and then, lastly, there may be something about forensics. So it's not just about like the interrogation room being in the room. Okay. I won't say that that's a complete diversion, but it does kind of move things in a certain direction when people kind of get the hint that they may be getting caught. Okay, so when someone feels cornered, you can expect their behavior to kind of shift, even if it's just gradually. Okay, so let's get into the questions. But before I do that, I do need to let you see some of the pre shuffle that came out. So there's something about this dinner that strikes me as odd. Okay. Let's just look at this little spread. And then I do have a bunch of clarifiers that I need to get to. And then we'll get to those other questions. So the matriarch hid the truth. There's something with that timeline. Like I said, somebody who's manipulating the whole situation. I think they felt like the best thing to do would do a morning rush, somewhat in broad daylight. I am questioning whether or not something happened, and because it's like the hardest part that I can't really visualize all the way is the effort to get her from the house, get her from Annie's house to Nancy's house, back to Nancy's house. Like, did she ever really go back? Or did something happen in the car and then they just went somewhere from there? And maybe the digital footage that we're seeing of this camera being obscured and smashed is after the fact. Like, what if that is after the fact? I'm also even wondering if the DNA that they found at the front door, if that actually is Nancy's. Yes, I did see a source say that it was. However, what if that is a detail that's been sent out as a way to throw things off? Okay. So, but I do feel like the intention was to do it late at night, early morning, and to get her in the daytime so they can have some explanation for later. Now, why all of this is happening, I do feel like this has to do with maybe power of attorney and a beneficiary situation. Like maybe someone wanted control over, um, you know, what do you call it? So it's power of attorney, but control over like insurance, because that insurance policy card keeps coming out. Insurance policy changes, which is alarming to me because I feel like it was almost like they're waiting, and that could be another thing that law enforcement is doing, like creating these other diversions to build time. And then with them retrieving a lot of mail, yes, they could be trying to figure out a ransom situation, but they could also be figuring out if there are, if people are expecting timely um, information, like a change in the insurance policy. Was there something in the will that changed that made Annie upset? And she felt like this was the plan to kind of like settle that. Maybe she didn't know about the specific changes and assumed that she could still get out, cash out on something. But it does feel like, like this could be a situation of like elderly abuse and whatever. Okay, but the insurance policy change could be mentioned, or there could be some reference to it from a witness. Their recent statement. Okay, now a witness could be someone that last saw her, Nancy, in this reported disappearance timeline correlations. Okay, so there's something about the timelines. I'm telling you, and Annie said something that wasn't true, thinking she was too smart. You know how sometimes there are times where people have thought that they are too smart and they could like lie their way out of something. Now, but again, I feel like a lot of this will be oversimplified and blamed on Tommaso and Annie, most likely, if this is the case. If this is worst case scenario, that this daughter tried to put a hit out on her mother, but did so by perhaps poisoning her, because that has come up a lot. Like maybe the dinner involved poisoning her, getting her sedated enough to where she could be transported out. Um, Now, there's something about being overdressed for the weather. I don't know if that's in reference to that suspect video. We have a group operates underground again, double crossed by a friend. Official cover up falls apart. Traffic to the elites, organized crime member. We've already seen a lot of this, and I'm telling you, it has something to do with this like black sheep. Connected to a criminal background. Okay. Now, somebody could have also been paranoid. This has been coming out a whole lot. I feel like I'm referencing what could have been dinner. Nancy could have like felt weird or felt strange. I know in some of the earlier readings there was a lot to do with her head. Maybe her head felt funny, dizzy, disoriented, but either way she was able to kind of like disassociate from the event, and she suspected something was funny. Like she may have even known it was coming to some degree, that like in that moment, like, oh, I'm being, drugged, and this feels weird because I don't have really control over it. And if she has mobility issues and who knows what else she can't do, so there's that. Now let's get into some of these other details. There's a karmic tie to the perpetrator, and I feel like this is where I'm tying these two people together. Annie and Tommaso are linked to some really dark shit. Now, another thing about Nancy that's coming up is her spirit has not crossed over. This is been coming up a lot in the last like 3-4 days, I want to say. And I think it's because it's almost like, okay, so I've told you guys before, I don't like talking to dead people. I don't do that necessarily, but a lot of times I can pick up on scenarios around them and maybe their thoughts and emotions before the time of death. Okay, so in this instance, I feel like she is trying to help solve this case by literally being, it's almost like she's trying to, it doesn't really make sense, but it makes sense. It's like she's trying to radiate strong, like trying to keep her spirit attached to the land itself. For the sake of finding her. It's like she wants to be found. There's going to be some twisted outcome. That's been coming out a lot, of course. But yeah, this also has some weird motive where it's like socioeconomically vulnerable people or their perception of things. But what we're really dealing with is like some type of rivalry. Okay. And it's some type of rivalry, and it feels like it could be between the two sisters, or all of the siblings. There could be something here, but we have whistleblower silence, chosen one silence, and the scapegoat. So they could have been using almost like Savannah as the scapegoat. Now, I touched on something possibly being a factor. Annie was the one who lived near the mom. So a lot of the brunt of maybe overseeing the caretaking of their mom most likely landed on her. And there could be something with this in the middle of a storm, the child star rival. They could have been in the middle of a fight, some type of in the middle of an argument or disagreement of the power of attorney, who should be taking care of mom, who should have control over mom, all of that. And it's like maybe this money hungry beneficiary situation came about because they were obsessed with controlling this woman's money or being over it. Now, execution style keeps coming out of here. Gun control came out in reverse. I don't know. God, I hope this case does not get closed, but there is something here about case being reopened, new evidence found. That could just be they're finding new like leads with these encrypted message. There's also a vehicle movement analysis, and I think this is what we're seeing where they're tracing. Now a lot of people have been talking about the fact that they found a glove and how convenient that they find a glove right now after they show a video. And this is 11 days after the fact that they should have started their search. So I do find it a likely thing that they could have used the glove to either, you know, because it was done in such broad daylight in front of the media, it almost feels like it was done on purpose. Not to necessarily cover up certain things, even though we have that corrupt official somewhere. Um, they didn't come out in this reading. However, they still are looming in the background, and because of that, there's still the pressure or possibility that that could have been planted for nefarious reasons. But it also could have been planted there just to kind of throw things off with the killer again, or whoever is involved in the situation, making them feel like, oh my God, I left something. What would the normal response be if you thought you had all the loose ties tied up and you really didn't, and then you see that there's arrests made and people are confiscating phones and you can't communicate, which you don't really want to communicate if you are a part of the situation anyway, because you know how suspicious and maybe people are monitoring you. I don't, the logic behind a lot of this seemed as though someone really thought that they were too smart. Now there's a co-worker here or a boss, and this could feel like a co-conspirator who is the psychopath, very calculated and cold. They were thinking about using some type of private jet as an escape, possibly. Something could be found in water again. Okay, what else? We have the car engine being tampered with, something to do with asphyxiation or losing, air. Maybe they could have, put a pillow over her face. I don't know. Sorry to be crass about it. Now, doing something during peak business hours is either very intentional or a terrible mistake. That may come out as far as like getting certain things. We have this equipment rental records. We already know for a fact that the backpack was purchased from Walmart. It's a Walmart brand. However, there was like tactical pants, some type of vest. There was a lot of other things. And I wonder why, now that I'm thinking about it. They did have a gun in the front of their waistband. So that's another thing. This person, whoever this suspect is, right? In these public released photos. Okay. Now, part of the reason why Nancy is trying to stay connected to the land is because of the afternoon heat. The exposure to extreme hot and cold is important to her for some reason. Okay. There's silent pleas for help. Random act. I think this is what they tried to make it out to be. One glove only is back out here again. I hope you guys are following me when I am doing these real-time readings, because the one glove only came out yesterday, very early morning, before there was this the video, before we got any footage. Okay, the DA case report. I think the DA has their work cut out for them. I'm gonna say it again. Now, what else do we have? There could be a bail privilege that's received. This seems like more so farther down the line. Someone could get out on bail for something, and there could be some criticism about it. Now, the movement, let's talk about the movement. There was email metadata analysis, okay? There's something about digital payment tracing performances. That has to do with the ransom thing. Then we have surveillance footage edited. I have thought about the possibility of law enforcement also editing that video to show just a specific piece of it, so that while it's broadcasted, the culprit knows that they have been seen, but they don't know what was seen. They don't know how much was actually captured. Okay, we just have a snippet. All right, now as far as the evidence, we're going to get into that in another reading. What they should be looking for and all of that. But let's continue real quick. into these spirit questions. Okay, so we know that as it relates to interrogating people and allowing for people to kind of tell on themselves, there are certain fracture signals that we can also look out for as well. Okay, so there could be sudden distancing language, like talking about someone in the past, like our mother was, you know how someone will reference a person as if they are not present anymore, as if their subconscious is almost telling on them. Now, there could be also, as a fracture signals, emotional misalignment with the situation. Like they're kind of just not grounded and tied to it in the way someone would be if they were truly concerned. Okay. Attempts to control narrative timing, like being hyper focused on what we know as far as the timeline is concerned and trying to align to it and conveniently place yourselves in between that. There could also be a withdrawal from public view. We have not seen Annie. There's been one or two spots, but again, it's been said they're put in hiding right now just to kind of see if there is any movement, to see if they can maybe even lure other people to them. And then hypervisibility to overcompensate may come to follow. You know, the more conversation that there is speculating against Annie and Tommaso and their possible involvement, I think the more they do need to be concerned about being seen in the public. The image that we have of them on that first day, I think, is so damaging that anything after that has to be strategically planned and has to be done with Savannah, because she is the child star who is the rival. The what is it? I think it was like the loner and then the child star rival, who's also the chosen one. And they could be using a network to kind of like make Savannah be silent. Okay. I've also touched on like my complete theory about what they want her to really be silent about. I think it goes deeper than, oh, just being silent for the sake of, you know, your mother being alive or being able to retrieve your mother. It goes deeper than that. Okay, so fractures don't happen like instantly. This is something that, you know, gradually picks up. So let's get into, is the psychological pressure currently being applied strategically? Is law enforcement strategically applying pressure to people involved? Oh man. Okay, so we have expensive suit dressed to impress a participant. So they're trying to figure out who's participating. All right. So this is the psychological work working? Yes, it's working. I tried to warn them before it happened. Objects are moving. Certain things could have been moved. Okay, during the days, there could be specific things that have been moved, which would be a form of tampering of evidence. The body was moved after death. We've already kind of felt like that was kind of confirmed. They took something from you, or they took something from me. This is coming from Nancy's energy. Okay, GPS coordinates logged again, and then death in custody. All right, let's move on. Has someone already contradicted themselves privately? Has someone already contradicted themselves privately? Emotional breakdown just flew out. Strangulation. Emotional breakdown over a strangulation. Somebody could have had some type of emotional breakdown, outburst, and kind of gave it away. I'm even seeing if they were, you know, brought in for questioning, it's almost like they broke down in the confessional, like they just giving up all the tea and crying about it. Someone's singing like a bird, but I wonder if this has to do, see, and I think also too with the ransom recently sent out today, where they said a person was trying to get at least one Bitcoin, which would be in the equivalent of like $60,000. 1 Bitcoin to offer up a name involved in the kidnapping. And that would just be a name. Law enforcement wants the whole operation shut down because it was obviously sophisticated enough where there is more than one person. Now, they didn't get very far, but they got far enough to where they could really create a lot of reasonable doubt in a lot of situations. So, has someone already convicted? Well, no, I said that already. But is cooperation developing behind the scenes? Like, who's cooperating? Is everyone cooperating? We have the outsider. The outsider, groundskeeper, knowledge patterns. Okay, the groundskeeper. Now, this could be in reference to the groundskeeper. You know, they did say that they took some swabs from the caretakers and pool guy, whatever. But because whoever was in that video took a piece of bush, I feel like this could be like in reference to that. The outsider, person outside, groundskeeper patterns. I think they're looking up the patterns of like where they went. I'm pretty sure with all the surveillance that we have in the world that they could create. But you know what is so crazy? Out there are no streetlights, which means that they don't have a lot of areas to hang up cameras. You know, like when you get out to a main road, maybe in a place like Tucson, Arizona, somebody let me know if I'm incorrect. You can't see people. So you may only get to track certain things once you get certain places. So that's why they've gone to the Circle K to see if they can maybe see the same car that they took into custody going in a specific route. They've gone around to the other neighbors, but a lot of people live far, far apart. Not only do they live spread out apart, a lot of them don't have cameras in the places that you would think, because you know they kind of have a certain level of trust in the neighborhood. It seems like it's, you know, older people who have been in the neighborhood for 15 plus years. Okay, now is cooperation developing behind the scenes? Let's just get one more confirmation for that. Cooperation behind the scenes. Divine timing orchestrated this. Distinguish actors versus messengers versus bystanders. So what did I tell you? They're trying to figure out who these participants are. I'm going to leave some of these cards off to the side so we can get, you know, we can dissect them further. But there's so much that's coming out in this case. I really have to take a time to pause. Sometimes I will leave a spread out for a few hours just so I can really get through the density of it. But right now they are really narrowing down who's involved, and not so much narrowing down. It's like they're identifying key players right now. Someone was following the victim. This keeps coming up. Obviously, we know that they were tracking them. They were targeted. But for how long? Ooh, stabbing is here. All right, this person is connected to this, or whoever this organized crime member is. It's a lot of crime, okay? It's a lot of different forms of crime. They're a very violent group, okay? Will the next development come for pressure rather than discovery? Will the next development come for pressure rather than discovery? Will the next development come for pressure rather than discovery? Strange tattoo or mark recognized. The timeline is out here again, so they're questioning that timeline. The living is being haunted right now. Somebody's really feeling really guilty. Why is this unfolding right now? Maintenance contractor access logs. Okay, there was a video of a guy who was, well, he was going around Tucson, not necessarily around Nancy's neighborhood, but it looked like some type of telephone electrician type of person, but he was taking pictures of the inside of people's homes. So there could be a lot about like confirming people who were around at the time, but it's like at the time of, I guess, between February 31st and January 1st. I also want to get confirmation on how they know that she was last seen January 31st. The high priestess is here. Blunt force trauma, heavy machinery, burn documents, the cartel. bus or public transportation. Someone's hiding me. Blood not belonging to the victim. Okay, so what did I say? I feel like that tip about saying, oh, the blood, we found that this came out. They said they confirmed the blood at the front door and tied it to Nancy, but that could be to throw them off. What if those plastic gloves really broke and it was the perpetrator's blood, and this was after what was done? Maybe he drove. Something happened to Nancy at the house. She was there, or he drove her somewhere else. Never drove her home. I don't think the route straight from the house to the home ever happened. I think he went back to her house to change the security, not necessarily because he did something in the house. This is a possibility, just speculation. Not necessarily because he did something in the house, but maybe it has something to do with him doing something to cover up the security cam in the event that they go back to it and look at it, because I think there's also security cameras inside the home. Okay. Now, there's some phone records that are going to reveal the truth. Okay. Body disposed, postmortem. I know. Okay. So that'll be the next development. Something about like, the next development will have something to do with phone records. Nothing like really substantial. That's kind of irritating. Is someone feeling the weight more than the public realizes right now? Does someone feel the weight? Does someone feel the weight? A family member feels the weight of something. I'm helping solve my own case. I told you Nancy's energy is here, heavy. Okay. There could be some type of projection or gaslighting going on. Somebody wants them to feel. Somebody wants people to feel sorry for them. Death ruled as accidental. Okay, that's what they want. They want to project something about like it being an accidental death. What happens if, like, do you get your insurance policy if there's some strange death, like a kidnapping? Is someone feeling the weight more than the public realizes? Is there anything else that could come out? We have staggered communication chain, settled out of court. Okay. Has a fracture already occurred? Has a fracture already occurred? Has a fracture already occurred? All right. We have preservation of the crime scene. Silencer gun. Extradition treaty limitations. Extradition treaty limitations. Okay, somebody could be from one of these countries that were doing that whole deporting illegals and making them go back to their country. Somebody is linked to this case that is going to deal with some extradition. Like they're not supposed to be here anyway. Wrong person is convicted. We've seen this already come out. So there's something about like a person being accused but not being the right person. They may continue to do that. So that could be a part of like a fracture, putting pressure on someone just flew out. Okay. So somebody is definitely getting some pressure. They feel it. Restricted property zones. They can't go back to somewhere though. They can't go back to something. Something about the flickering lights could be significant. Also, there could be something that they can do with like, okay, the guy who was detained talked about how they didn't really ask him too many questions. They mentioned Nancy being kidnapped, and then they said something about his eyes matched. And I'm wondering where they got that conclusion. Is this like a system AI? Is this like that Palantir system that they're using out on people to try to identify them? Because if that's the case, oh, they need to go back to the drawing board. Because if y'all are trying to use pictures and video to identify people from an iris, and if light is involved and flashlight is involved, like that may change, you know, things significantly. It may change the look of a person's iris, even with thermal imaging. thermal imaging came out before in the beginning of the reading. And I think, that is what we're seeing now, where it's like, I can't believe it came out. I thought it was in more so in reference to just like Arizona and the terrain and having to navigate that after they lose daylight. But it's also about like this camera footage thing. Now, is timing being used as leverage? Is law enforcement using timing as a way of leverage? We have close friend, security camera glitch, partial. Okay, I told you somebody could be involved, somebody's close, and it has to do with this camera. Okay, somebody saw something and they didn't backtrack the stuff correctly. Okay, so I think I'm gonna do another video on the other things, but we do have, this is some development. I will say that this is a little bit of progress. Maybe I should touch on it a little bit. There is something about like hair and DNA not in the database. I don't know if this is just in reference to, oh, okay. So they may have Nancy's DNA, but it may not be in the form of blood. Maybe they have an old brush and they can test something. But maybe the blood that was tested, if it isn't Nancy's, they could be at a standstill because it's not in the database. Like this person has never maybe gotten in trouble to the point where they needed to submit DNA. The RV or camper is back out here. Car with fake plates, a car with unique stickers. So there could be a car. What does Annie's car look like? Does she have stickers? Is it an older car? Does it have fake plates? Or is there this is just maybe in reference to another car that's involved? Again, they're still in this rescue, recovery, resolution phase right now. Jealousy or envy came out. Mind control or psychological torture. Oh, jealousy or envy with the psychological torture. It was like somebody wanted to see Savannah squirm. Okay. Yeah, they definitely want to see her squirm. That's so sad to me. Okay, now the mother figure says, follow the money. Medical records have been concealed. Phase 2. The participant dynamics. That's what they're trying to figure out right now. Law enforcement is trying to figure out the dynamics between family members. Who's close to who? Crypto Bitcoin ransom is out here. Day 1. False justice. Someone paid off. Confession disguised as a joke. Narrative anchor. They have it now. Public tip lines recently threatened. Okay. We do know that she was recently threatened. We do know that public tip lines have come out. I think there was a report like 18,000 people. Narrative anchor. All right, I'm ready to close out. Is there anything else that I need to cover? I think that's about it. Cases like this don't just turn on evidence, they turn on the people. Okay, so that's what we're going to see right now. I hope you see that this wasn't really about like proving anything necessarily. It's just about like understanding how some of this pressure is going to reshape a lot of the outcomes that we see to come in the next few days, months leading up to like them finalizing the outcome of this case, if we ever get a conclusion. And when the next shift happens, it may not be because something was found. Okay. Even though we have the gloves, we have this mask that was mentioned, we may not have anything. It may be because someone's, bent. It may be something else, all completely different, that brings this whole situation to a close. Because remember, the card keeps talking about a twisted outcome. Okay, so stay tuned for what is to come. I do have another video after this. So I love you guys. I will see you in the next one. Bye.